We've all had those moments. The essay that sits half finished on your laptop, the text you've been meaning to send, the gym membership you'll start using next week. You know what you should do, yet you don't do it. Instead, you scroll, clean your room, or fall down another YouTube rabbit hole. It feels irrational, almost self-sabotaging. But procrastination isn't laziness, it's psychology in motion. Beneath every delayed action lies a tangled web of fear, self-doubt, and emotional avoidance. Today, we're not just talking about why we procrastinate, but who we become when we do. At its core, procrastination is not a problem of time management, it's a problem of emotion regulation. This idea comes from psychologist Dr. Timothy Pychyl, who spent decades studying the phenomenon. He argues that procrastination is our way of coping with difficult emotions, the boredom, anxiety, insecurity, or self-doubt that certain tasks trigger. When we put things off, we're not running from the task itself, we're running from how the task makes us feel. The brain, wired for comfort and immediate gratification, chooses temporary relief over long-term growth. That's why, even when we know we'll regret it later, we still hit next episode. Neuroscience backs this up. The amygdala, our brain's fear center, activates when we anticipate stress or discomfort. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and self-control, tries to override it, but it's not always strong enough. In moments of stress or fatigue, emotion wins over logic. The result? You click away from your responsibilities not because you're incapable, but because your brain is protecting you from a perceived threat, the threat of failure, judgment, or even success. But where does that fear come from? Often, procrastination masks a deeper belief about the self, what psychologists call self-worth contingency. For many people, productivity and achievement are tied to their sense of value. If I fail, I'm not just bad at this task, I'm a failure as a person. So instead of risking that pain, we avoid the task altogether. Dr. Jane Berker and Dr. Lenora Ewan, in their classic book Procrastination, Why You Do It, What to Do About It, describe this as self-handicapping. By delaying, we preserve an illusion of potential. If we never fully try, we never have to face what happens if we're not good enough. In a strange way, procrastination becomes an emotional shield. There's also the dopamine trap. The human brain evolved to favor short-term rewards over long-term ones. Every time you scroll social media, your brain releases dopamine, a feel-good neurotransmitter that rewards you for quick hits of pleasure. But finishing an essay or coding a project offers delayed rewards, which the brain finds less motivating in the moment. Psychologist Dr. Fuschia Sirois calls this the temporal gap of reward. Our present self, impulsive, emotional, and pleasure-seeking, takes the wheel while our future self quietly suffers the consequences. This internal tug-of-war is why we say things like, "I'll do it tomorrow." The problem is, tomorrow never feels like today. It always feels distant, safer, easier. To understand procrastination deeply, we have to talk about shame, because every time we delay, we reinforce a painful cycle, guilt for not doing the task, followed by shame about who we are because of it. This shame then triggers more avoidance, and the cycle continues. Psychologist Brené Brown describes shame as the intensely painful feeling of believing we are flawed and unworthy of love or belonging. When procrastination becomes chronic, it's not about poor discipline, it's about internalized shame. We tell ourselves stories like, "I'm lazy," or "I'll never change," and when we believe those stories, we live them. Interestingly, perfectionists are some of the worst procrastinators. Because perfectionism isn't about wanting things to be perfect, it's about fearing that anything less than perfect makes you unlovable or unworthy. The perfectionist brain sees every task as a test of identity, so instead of risking an imperfect outcome, they stall, tweak, plan endlessly, or never start at all. Psychologists call this adaptive versus maladaptive perfectionism. The adaptive type drives excellence. The maladaptive type drives paralysis. Let's go even deeper, into identity. Many people who procrastinate chronically aren't just avoiding effort, they're protecting a fragile self-image. Imagine you've been praised your whole life for being smart or talented. That becomes part of your identity, but now you're faced with a task that challenges you, something that could prove you're not as naturally gifted as people say. Suddenly, effort feels dangerous, because if you try and fail, the illusion of your identity cracks. This is what psychologist Carol Dweck calls a fixed mindset, the belief that intelligence and ability are static traits. People with a fixed mindset often procrastinate because effort threatens their sense of self. In contrast, those with a growth mindset see effort as proof of growth, not evidence of inadequacy. There's also a deeper, more existential layer to procrastination, one that philosopher John Perry calls structured procrastination. It's a strange paradox where we put off important things by doing other important things. It's our way of maintaining the illusion of productivity while avoiding what truly matters. But this illusion has a cost, because underneath we know we're avoiding something meaningful. And that gap between what we value and what we do creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. That dissonance quietly eats away at our self-trust. Every time we break a promise to ourselves, we reinforce the belief that we can't be relied upon, and rebuilding that trust takes time. So, how do we break the cycle? The answer isn't more willpower, it's more compassion. Research shows that self-compassion, a concept developed by psychologist Dr. Kristin Neff, helps reduce procrastination far more effectively than self-criticism. When we forgive ourselves for past failures, we're less likely to avoid future challenges. It's counterintuitive, but guilt rarely leads to action. Shame only fuels paralysis. Compassion, on the other hand, creates psychological safety. When we believe we're allowed to fail, we become more willing to try. Practical strategies rooted in psychology can help. For example, the 2-minute rule, popularized by James Clear, uses the principle of behavioral activation. Start so small that it's impossible to resist. Begin writing for 2 minutes, opening the document, or cleaning for 30 seconds, because starting changes your emotional state. The act of doing reduces the emotional resistance that thinking builds. You're no longer negotiating with your feelings, you're building momentum. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, also emphasizes task reframing, shifting how you think about a task from I have to I choose to. This subtle change transforms the task from an obligation into an act of agency, which strengthens intrinsic motivation. Another powerful approach is understanding temporal self-disconnect. Our future self often feels like a stranger, which makes it hard to act in their best interest. Studies by Dr. Hal Hershfield at UCLA found that when people visualize their future selves, even through age-progressed images, they make better long-term decisions. So when you procrastinate, it helps to ask, what would my future self thank me for doing today? It turns an abstract goal into an emotional connection. But maybe the most important shift is learning to tolerate discomfort. Because every meaningful action in life, writing, creating, loving, growing, involves friction. The goal isn't to eliminate resistance, but to move with it. Motivation doesn't come before action, it comes after. Once you take the first small step, your brain begins releasing dopamine, not just for pleasure, but for progress. That's how discipline is built, not through brute force, but through emotional fluency. The truth is, procrastination isn't a moral failure, it's a mirror, reflecting how we relate to fear, pressure, and self-worth. When you catch yourself avoiding something, pause and ask, what am I really afraid to feel right now? That's where growth begins. Because behind every undone task lies an unspoken story about who we believe we are. And when we learn to face that story with curiosity instead of judgment, procrastination stops being the enemy. It becomes a teacher. So the next time you catch yourself scrolling instead of starting, don't just ask what you're avoiding, ask why. Maybe it's fear of failure, fear of success, or fear of imperfection. Whatever it is, it's not proof that you're broken, it's proof that you're human. The challenge isn't to eliminate procrastination, it's to understand the part of you that still needs time. Because once you do, you'll realize that beneath all the delay, the self you've been avoiding is the same one that's been waiting patiently to grow.